Okay.
Welcome back.
Yeah, my internet dropped. There's a storm up here. I just cranked up my backup internet source here. So if I go out again, I'll be a little bit quicker coming back on. All right. So the point is, the third time that an EC kid does the same thing, he gets to pass go and collect two. He gets to go to the front of the line. It doesn't matter if you didn't suspend him the first two times. It doesn't matter if he's only got 3 days of out of school suspension. You don't get the 10 if they show a pattern. So the third time the EC kid gets in the fight, he goes to manifestation termination. We put him through the process on the third time. That's the caveat. So I've had, when the Children's Law Center sued us, and I would go out to the school to see, what stupid thing did you do now? And they said, well, we hadn't suspended him but 4 days so far this year. I said, but now tell me what he was suspended for. Well, he was fighting all 4 times. Well, then you're an idiot. And I'm stupid for hiring you. And I'm even stupider if I keep employing you. This kid is showing a pattern here. Did you not understand that piece of it? That if the kid's showing a pattern, an EC kid, you got to move him. You move him straight on into the manifestation termination. Well, we've got that far. You don't get, the only good thing that I know about getting old, and I can say this because I am old, is the ability to forget. That actually is a blessing when you get older, so that you can lay down and sleep. That you don't sit and worry and wonder and stuff that through your life. The good thing, the only good thing about getting older, that I know, is you have the luxury of forgetting. But when you're a professional, you don't have the luxury. You don't never ever use the excuse with your employer, I forgot. What else did you forget? That tells me that you're an incompetent person. We're going to get to bouncing in just a minute, Brad, when we talk about PBIS. Let's don't make me mad any earlier than we have to, seeing how I'm not a PBIS fan. But for EC kids, any change of placement or any of the 4 types of suspension counts in the 10 days. So any of those counts against the day. The third time deal is that when you have an exceptional child, and the third time that they've been referred to your office as an administrator for the exact same thing, it doesn't matter that you haven't used up your 10 days yet on them. You need to go ahead and initiate the process on them because they have shown a pattern of behavior. So it's 10 days, you get up to 10 days, unless they're showing a pattern of behavior. And then we need to move very quickly to the manifestation of termination. Because what may happen as a result of that, we may determine that this kid's behavior is a manifestation of his disability. But that allows us then to add behavior goals or to change or put a more restrictive setting on their IEP. That gives us some leverage. That gives us some help with this child. Why would you continue to hit your own thumb with a hammer? This kid is just disrupting your building every day, disrupting that classroom. And you say, well, all I can do is send him up. No, if you can show a pattern, you can move to that manifestation termination. If it's a functional disability, we can change the IEP. We can move for a more restrictive setting. We can add behavior goals into that IEP. That gives us a lever to not just take that whipping every day. That's a good thing. See, everybody thinks, well, oh shoot, I'm trying to avoid having to do all that paperwork. No, you're not. That paperwork is your ability to get some help for that child and give everybody else some relief. I'll be first to tell you, I have absolutely told parents, when parents said to me, you're suspending my child from school, that's not good for my child. And I have said to parents, you're absolutely right. I acknowledge that suspending your child out of school is not good for your child, but it is good for the rest of us. We need a break. And so if you've got a child that's EC and he's fighting every day and disrupting your building, you need a break. If you can't send him home, you need to use the process in your favor. Due process is what we're talking about. You need to use due process in your favor. rather than it working against you, you make it work for you. So understanding, as Cassandra pointed out, EC process, due process is different, but it's not worse, it's just different, and we can actually use it to our advantage. So you need to remember that. And as as Michelle pointed out, you know, due process has two parts, substance and procedure. And where you get caught when you get sued is this was the policy, this was the substance of the due process policy, and what you did not follow that policy. The procedure that you used, you didn't get witness statements, you didn't let the kid give his side of the story, something you didn't do. It's that between what you're supposed to do and what you did is that margin where you get sued, that you violated this kid's rights. The district said that you would do this, but you did that. So that's why it's important to understand the distinction between substantive due process, that's what the district that you work for says you're going to do, and what you did. That's that piece of it. Now, you will be sued on one of two grounds. Excuse me. The first is arbitrary. These are the two standards. Arbitrary means that me and Dr. Caton, as I told you before, got caught smoking out backside the gym. And Dr. Maraglia, when they took us to her for our disciplinary, for our due process, they just sent her back to class and took me out back and shot me. You know, that's arbitrary. But it's also capricious in that shooting me was not in the handbook. The handbook didn't say you could shoot me. That was more punishment than the handbook allowed for. So let me go to the handbook now. As we discovered last week, every, you know, under 115C, 288, 306, and 47, it says that every district has to develop a code of conduct. So those three statutes, between those three. So let's go to that. Share screen. I'm going to show one from Charlotte-Mecklenburg. No. There it is. Here we go. So let's see what these questions are. Okay, got it. All right, so this is the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Code of Conduct. Let me get this where I can get to the slide over here on the side so that you can see it. This is what it looks like, this. And so what it has is this. It outlines due process, what the kids get to do, and safe harbor provision. That's part of their due process, student rights. It outlines everything you're going to do. It also gives the levels of consequences, starting with level 1 and what all those different consequences could be. Level 2, level 3, and level 4. It says, and it also says when you to apply those. So the arbitrary is you didn't follow that rule in applying which level it was, or you gave more punishment, capricious, or you ignored some kids and punished others. And one of the things you got to be really careful about is the notion of discretion, because you do have discretion from parent conference all the way to in-school suspension in level 1. You have to be careful that and track your statistics in Power School or the system that you're using. You have to track so that you make sure that every time a boy comes in, you give them in-school suspension, but every time a girl comes in for the same infraction, you just give them you just make a parent contact on them. That's still being arbitrary. You say, but it falls within the levels, but we have to monitor ourselves. We have our own biases. Maybe it's racial, maybe it's gender. maybe it's ethnic, but we have to, because we have such a range within the same levels, we can find ourselves always giving this group this much and always giving that group that little. So that's arbitrary. We have to monitor our own statistics, and you can run a report right out of Power School by incident and what the consequences are, and you can cross tab that with whatever variable you want, whether it be race or gender or grade level or whatever. You tend to find that you give this grade level, this, when they do this, you're going to give them this, but this group over here, you give them that. So you have different levels. Level 2, and then you have level 3 and all that. But then the capricious part comes in when you look at individual infractions, and it gives a minimum and maximum. What parents will get you on is if you go beyond what the maximum that particular incident called for. So if you give a level 2 consequence or punishment for student dress, that parent will appeal your decision and may even sue you on the basis of you were capricious. Because what does it say here on the screen? The maximum level of response that you can do for a kid who comes to school dressed inappropriately is a level 1 response. You can't send the kid home. That would be an out of school suspension. Level 2, that starts with level 2. The maximum level 1, according to the handbook, is in-school suspension. So if you send a kid home, and even if you said it's therapeutic, I'm sending them home, just saying, if you send a kid home, that's more punishment than the handbook allows. Now, I freely admit that I sometimes violated this policy when I was a high school principal. I had a young man who wore a dress to school, and the girls would complain that I was being arbitrary. I let him wear shorter dresses than I would let them wear, which is not a good thing for a young man wearing a dress too short, if you get my drift here. And so I would send him home, not because he was wearing a dress, but because his dress was too short. It didn't matter, though. In reality, I shouldn't have, So what I figured out pretty soon was I made him bring a pair of gym shorts to wear under the dress. Because seriously, I wasn't supposed to send him home. But you can't have him, he tended not to want to wear underwear and short dresses. That's not a good combination. That's absolutely a true story. Now, that's been a long time ago, but it was absolutely a true story. He was transgender or identified as female and wore dresses. But the girls didn't like it. They didn't mind, but they didn't like that he wore shorter dresses than they were allowed to wear. So again, it made sense. It was a good idea not to let him run around in a short dress with no underwear, but the code of conduct says that you can't send him home. You've got to figure out something else. That's capricious. My favorite story of that is absolutely when I was in the central office, I had a case at Providence High School. And that was before Ardrey Kell was built and took all of the elite, but it was a very elite high school in South Charlotte. And the kid brought knives to school and threatened people too, big ones. And so he was given a 10-day suspension, and I went down and did his hearing myself because it's a high-profile case. News media was a hold of it, and his parents sent in an attorney. They were out of the country. They were too busy to be bothered with him, and he was 18 years old. So he was allowed to bring his own attorney to his hearing, his due process hearing. And, I advised them, as I always did, that, anything you say will be used against you in a court of law, that these transcripts go to court for your criminal trial. And his attorney, who I've told you before, was a dead ringer for Booger on Revenge of the Nerds, that movie. Dead ringer for that guy. Looked like he was, 25 years old max. Had him testify. I'm trying to give him the high sign. Don't let him do this, incriminate him. He had him testify, admitted that he brought the knives. And then in the closing statements, his attorney argument was the case should be thrown out because the school was guilty of being capricious in their due process, that they had given him a 10-day out of school suspension and a recommendation for a long-term for an exclusion, and that the handbook, the range was only 5 days out of school for what he had done. And that's when I pointed out to him he was looking at the elementary code of conduct, not for high school. And then he wanted to strike his client's testimony. It's too late by then. But that story again goes to you should know the rules. And you should be able to back up whatever that you do when we're talking about due process. You need to monitor yourself so that you can actually be arbitrary within the range, even though you say, well, it says I can give them out in-school suspension in level 1 for this dress code infraction. But are you always giving the girls in school and just doing apparent contact on the boys or vice versa? So you have to be careful even within the range on arbitrary. Capricious is when you go outside of the range, when you go to a level above what you're allowed to, like I was doing, sending the boy home, which is a level 2 consequence for a level 1 offense. You got to be careful on those kinds of things. So those are your standards, arbitrary and capricious. And you've got to understand both sides of due process. Substantive, what does the law say the kid's supposed to get, and then procedural. Understanding, as we work backwards here, that EC kids have another level of due process that they get that regular ed kids don't get before that you can actually discipline them. I'm going to pause and catch my breath. We're right on time here. I'm going to go to, I'll start with Dr. Maraglia. And speak to anything that you would like to share about processing discipline, either in elementary or middle, and then we're going to go to Dr. Caton for her thoughts on processing discipline in high school. So Dr. Maraglia, if you'd start us out with your notion on elementary due process.
Well, I don't think you can emphasize enough that you need to know what your school district's policy is. And despite the fact that I'm in my 27th year, I don't ever levy any consequence or handle any sort of discipline issue without pulling that rights and responsibilities handbook out, which is what we call it in CMS. And I still refer to it. I don't ever just assume I know because this is the 500th fight I've dealt with in my career or whatever. You need to know what the rules are. And you need to take the time for the due process. Especially if you're in a school that has a lot of discipline issues, you can start feeling like an assembly line and working your way through. And you need to take the time to let that student tell you their side of the story. Just make it a habit that you have them write down their statement. It doesn't matter if they want to tell you orally, because a lot of times they will. Still have them write it down. And take the time to see if there are any witnesses, get their statements. If you have video cameras in your building, check those. That can be a huge support for you, either in helping build your case, or it can also be a support to help you from sticking your foot into something that you don't want to, because if you find out it really didn't happen this way, the kid really didn't do what has been reported to me. But you've got to take that time for due process, because that will keep your rear end from getting in a sling.
Mm-hmm. That is
I cannot
correct.
emphasize that enough. If you can say you gave that kid their chance to speak, and then make sure that especially if it's a suspension, you call home, but you send that paperwork home. You can send it with the kid, but also send a copy in the mail, because that's part of the process too, that they've got to be notified.
That is correct. So when you get, and I'll follow up on 2 points we go to Dr. Caton. When you get your response back from me about discussion board post 4 and 5, I give the takeaways, and it always starts with due process. Discipline done well takes time, patience, and okay. I'm getting time, patience, and experience. And you know, but again, as Dr. Maraglia said, she goes to that code of conduct every time. Again, that's what we promised them we'd do. That's the substantive part. And then her procedure, but it takes time, patience. You can't be quick, even though you might have a line out your door. One of the first things that I had to do, and I'm going to go to Dr. Caton as a high school principal, was I had to redesign the flow of our due process, because we had so many, in order to speed the flow, so that we would have time to get statements, check the tapes, do all the things that you need to do. And I moved some personnel, did some things, physically relocated, and did some things where when kids came in, we didn't just rubber stamp their punishment when they came in the door. We had time to talk to them and time to try to do, restorative justice as well, prevent it from happening again. It can't just be, we just go down the line handing out tickets. And that's what sometimes it feels like in high district schools. Dr. Caton?
Okay, so you touched on a lot of great things. Can you hear me okay this time?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I want to talk about your flow of due process. I'm a huge believer in that. I can, if anybody wants to see it, we have a discipline committee that we didn't have a good flow when we first got there. And to me, it's very important that I am not the first contact. I want to see what the teachers have done prior to. Have we referred to counseling? What have we done? What's the process? I want to see it all before it hits me. And just like Dr. Mago said, is that when you have like a fight or something, absolutely get those statements. I always have the students sign it, date it as well. Make sure you have that. Just like you said, I save them. It doesn't matter if it's been years. I always save them as well. You also touched upon EC discipline. Be very careful with your 10 days, meaning that if you might pop a kid for, if you might assign a student 5 days for fighting, I wouldn't do that for an EC kid. Be very sporadic with your 10 days, because they're, I usually would give them less because of you only have 10 days, like you said. So think about that when you're assigning them. Also, when you're writing up a disciplinary referral, stick to the facts. When you have a teacher write a referral, review it before you give it to that teacher. If the teacher says, I think he was acting, smart, like a smart, whatever person, don't edit that and tell them to stick to the facts. Okay. If a kid says ass, write ass. Don't say he was using inappropriate language. Tell them what it was. I mean, I'm very, you have to be very direct and don't have any assumptions when you read your disciplinary referrals. Stick to the facts. Don't have it flowery. And when your teacher write up stuff, they're always going to put assumptions in there, and they're always going to try to put things that shouldn't be in there. So make sure you review it before you ever let a parent see it. So that's all for me.
Excellent. And back to statements, I'll always say written statements are always the best practice. And if you have kids that are too young to do written statements, for those of you who are working with the primaries, bring in a counselor and have them dictate to the counselor the statement. That's a best practice as well. Now, back to Dr. Caton's point, teacher statements. Oh my God. Here are some of the things to avoid. Avoid references to other family members or brothers or sisters. Jimmy's a smart aleck, just like his brother Sam. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen that. None of that kind of stuff. Or just like every day, Jimmy's aggravating everybody like he doesn't know. We can only talk about the incident at hand. We can't bring prior incidents in. Those statements will get struck down on appeal. All that stuff will, and pretty much you'll lose your whole case over a teacher saying something detrimental or bringing previous incidents or other family members, or making some inappropriate or unsubstantiated, even though it might be true, there's nothing in evidence that says that, and it's not relevant to this case. Make sure they stick. It's just like Dragnet. Y'all not old enough to remember Dragnet. Just the facts, ma'am. That's what when they would take witness statements. The old 1960s TV show. Well, it was just the facts, ma'am. That was always, the catchphrase that they had. That's what you have to train teachers how to write appropriate statements for that will get through and not get thrown out on appeal. And so those are some of those kinds of things. School discipline, behavior, culture starts with due process. You've got to know what system. You've got to manipulate that system correctly. You've got to make sure that you train your staff on how to write statements. You've got to make sure that your administrative team, their flow, there's a process of how it goes. It moves quickly. You get statements. You allow kids to write statements. One of the first things that, when I said I moved all discipline out of the front office of the high school and set up a different office away from the, civilians that might see this. You brought them to A12 on the backside, and I had a person sitting there, a secretary. And guess what she did as soon as they came in, no matter what they were brought in for, when the campus security people brought them in, guess what she handed them a piece of paper and a pencil. Start writing your statement. Before they even got to an AP to start processing them, here, write your statement. And then that if they didn't bring it with them, the CSA, they were known, they reroute right back where you come, and you go sit and wait till that teacher writes the statement as to why the referral as to why this person is here. We can't read your mind. We can't guess. You have to tell us what they're here for. What are the charges? And when you do that, all of a sudden it speeds up and there's other people involved. And another thing I would suggest for high school, I had 6 APs and 2 admins, so I had 8 people. And I think I had 4 of them at any one time, full, process and discipline. But now one of the things that I avoided was this. I did not assign by grade level or age or alphabet or any of that. It was whoever's here takes it's next man or woman up. We're not going to sit here and wait till Miss So-and-so gets through doing this observation or gets back from lunch or wherever. When this kid comes in, if you're available, it's just like, it's not, some people, when they go to the barbershop, of course, you can see I hadn't been in a long time. You wait for your barber. There's no waiting for your barber. The next person up handles this disciplinary case. Again, we don't sit and let discipline will choke the life out of you. It will become the reason that you don't want to live anymore. Trust me. If you let it, it will run your life. It will run your school instead of you running it. And again, we're not trying to railroad people through, but we're trying to make sure that our process is as efficient as possible, that we've afforded the kid every bit of legal protection under due process, the substantive part of due process that we can, but we can't spend hours and hours on each case. We just can't. There's a time, there's time-space continuum, as I have to remind my wife from time to time, I'm only one man and I'm only be in one place at one particular time. Same way, there's a time-space continuum on discipline. We don't have 3 or 4 hours for every case that comes in. We have to find a way to get kids the rights that they deserve, but do it in a timely manner that doesn't just use up all of our time, but also doesn't use up all of our emotional capital. Discipline is a conflict situation, and it will wear you down. It will beat you down. It will make you not sleep at night. That's why I said, remember when I said, one of the good things about getting old is you can forget. Well, y'all aren't old enough to forget. You'll take discipline to bed with you. You'll think about all the bad stuff and the kids. And Dr. Caton just chimed in. You got to get discipline out of the front office. You have to make sure, although it's important, if you put it in the front office, you're giving it primacy in your building. You're saying discipline's more important. Behavior is more important than academic achievement. Please, and you say, well, Dale, that's kind of stupid. Well, no, it's not. I hear people tell me all the time, I have, and please don't any of you tell me that if kids behave better, they'll automatically learn more. No, they won't. If you want kids to learn more, you have to teach them more. But what happens when you have discipline in the front office, that becomes primal in your building. That becomes the most important thing. And what we have to do is have a culture of teaching and learning. How many times when I came on with your professors last semester did you hear me talk about we're trying to create a culture of teaching and learning? The ACTEL is all about that. That we want to identify our most empowered classroom leaders and then make them our school leaders. That's the whole notion here. Is we're trying to create a culture of teaching and learning. And if you're processing discipline in the front office, if they're dragging them into the front office, kicking and screaming, if you're spending all of your time processing discipline, then that's what your school is. It's just a penitentiary.
And Dr. Lamb, I feel like it's also a matter of what do you want people to see?
Mm-hmm.
And, we all know some schools have reputations for being the academic school, some have the reputations of being the discipline school, and you never know what's going to pop off in your front office if you're dealing with discipline there. And if you've got parents there to sign out children or to come in and volunteer, it's not like we're trying to hide things, but you don't want to put it on the front porch either.
No, exactly, especially with social media. And I know, I don't know if we still do it in school or not, but one of the things that we used to do was we'd line kids up, to try to teach them not to gossip, especially in middle school. And you'd tell a secret, you'd whisper it and go down the line and to see, it's kind of like a party trick. This is what I said. And by the time it gets to the end of the line, it's gone through 10 different mouths. What is it now? I snagged my toenail and I had to clip it off. And by the time you get to the end of the line, he lost his whole leg. That's how things multiply or amplify, especially through social media. But Dr. Maraglia's point is it's not we're trying to hide anything, but we're trying to make this not be primal in our building. And parents will stand there and just gawk. They'll just gawk and they'll just take pictures and record.
They will.
And just ride along. And there's another thing that the rule when I moved the discipline out of the front office, there's another thing that I did as well. I moved all deliveries out of the front office as well, because delivery people are the world's biggest gossips. The people that deliver, and especially like if you have a courier service for your district that runs a courier delivery service inside of your district, those people and FedEx and all the different private, the delivery people, they are the worst gossips in the world. You do not want them to see how the sausage is made. That's you can't let them see. And so we're not trying to hide anything, but it really gets ginned up, especially on social media, and we're trying to stay off the front pages. So you've got all the due process pieces for the handbook for your district. Then there is a state handbook as well. And Brad, I'm going to get to PBIS now when I get to the state handbook. So let me share the screen. In North Carolina, it's called, let me close that one. North Carolina Disciplinary Data Reporting Procedures, and it says that we report incidents, not outcomes. It talks about bullying, to report when I think it was Dr. Maraglia, it might have been, was mentioning sending the paperwork home on suspensions. You do realize that to generate the official suspension paperwork, that incident has to be entered into PowerSchool, your data collection system. And off the third screen, you go through the first screen, then the perpetrator screen, and then the consequence screen. When you get there and you select out of school suspension, then and only then will it generate the formal legal suspension document paperwork that she was referring to. So if you try to bootleg suspensions or make them up, that's not an official suspension notice. If you send that home or hand it to a kid, that case will be thrown out based on you didn't give them the formal paperwork. The only thing that is real, is valid, will stand up in court or under appeal is the one that's generated out of PowerSchool, period. Had a situation at Vance High School where DPI called me and said, we think there's something wrong with their terminal. They haven't entered any suspensions in for over a month. I went up there, and the Teach for America young lady that they had, New Leaders for New Schools, who hadn't been through an administrative law course, was carried a clipboard for a year and got to be an AP, said, well, they told me when I came here to reduce the number of suspensions. I said, what they meant was get teachers out of their room and make them, supervise and do hall duty and bus duty and cafeteria duty. They didn't say make up your own and Xerox your own suspension form and not enter it into the system. That wasn't what they meant. So I had to, as my very kind wife would say, well, where did she go? I said, well, I don't know, honey. I guess she went home, but she couldn't stay here. We couldn't employ her any longer. I just had to revert back several $1,000s to the state, because guess what happens if you suspend a kid out of school and don't do his official suspension? He shows up as present on the attendance report. How do we fund schools? Average daily membership. So if you count a kid in school that's not in school, that's actually suspended, you have to revert that money back to the state. She had done that on over 850 days. And so I had to revert back several tens of thousands of dollars. And so again, that's what we're talking about here. Is part of due process is you enter the incident into your database. It's PowerSchool. And it generates, and if you don't do a suspension, you're fine. But if you do a suspension, it generates that paperwork. And that's the only official suspension document that's recognized. And so when we get board appeals or when we're going to court, that's the first thing we put the packet together. That's where it starts, is with the teacher's referral, all the statements behind that, that everything that we had that we made our decision on. And then the last document on that packet is the official suspension notice. It had to be dated that day. If that's not there, they didn't even go to appeal. The decision's overturned. So you've got to understand that. And so here are all the rules on reporting, civil rights, zero tolerance, expulsions are illegal, everything that has to be reported to law enforcement. And I've got a separate document. And so what we get to is we have people who go to systems of discipline. For example, PBIS. PBIS, there's not a thing in the world wrong with PBIS except people use it inappropriately. I had a doctoral student. She was at 71st in Fayetteville, and her dissertation was on PBIS. And when she got through her methodology in chapter 4, I said, you've got a problem. She said, what? I said, your qualitative and quantitative doesn't match. Your school has reduced suspensions, out of school suspensions in 1 year by 80%, claiming that they have implemented PBIS. The problem is when you went and talked to teachers about it, they didn't even know they had a PBIS program. It was just being used as cover to not suspend kids. We had a similar situation, not using PBIS, but at McClintock in Charlotte, where the principal got on TV without authorization and said, I hadn't suspended a kid all year for fights. I got to get over there quick. What's going on? And everybody knew the kids were fighting like cats and dogs, and we wondered why. When we got over there, we found out why. She just wasn't suspending them. She didn't say that. She implied that they weren't fighting at her school. What the truth was is she wasn't suspending them for fighting. She wasn't following the handbook, and so if the kids knew they weren't going to get sent home, guess what they were doing? It was it was Game of Thrones every day over there. And so the problem with PBIS is not how it's used, it's how it's misused. We use it for cover, to claim results that just aren't there, to find ways to keep kids in the building. I don't like the rolling and bouncing. Think about that just if you're a lay person, even if you aren't an educator, how little sense that makes. Jimmy's been cutting up and disrupting my class all day long. And my response is, I'm going to send him over to Chris's class now and let him disrupt it the rest of the day. How smart is that? So PBIS, if used properly, is wonderful. You need the state in that handbook I just showed you says that you have to adopt a system of discipline like PBIS. It doesn't exactly say PBIS, but you do have to have one like it. There is a state website for PBIS. It's under week 5 tonight. I've done that link. PBIS can be a good thing for your school if used properly. It's like anything. It's like any tool. Used improperly, it makes things a whole lot worse. And so that's not my opinion. That's real. That's what happens. Now, my opinion on PBIS is it, and my biggest complaint is it leads to what I was talking to before, arbitrary, because there's so much discretion. Certain kids always get the minimum, and certain kids always get the maximum, and it just reinforces those, that discriminatory practice, and that's what bothers me. It basically gives certain kids a second chance always, when other kids don't get that same second chance. That's what I don't like about PBIS, and it's very racially identifiable. I've looked at the data. Trust me, I know. I used to be an expert in this area, and so I used to have access. I worked for DPI on this, and it's very apparent that in some places the PBIS is a get out of jail free card for white kids and affluent kids, and other kids don't get that same benefit of the doubt, and that makes me not a fan. And it's used, and that's even when it's used properly. Too many times, it's the second chance for certain kids and not for others, even under the best of circumstances. And when it's used improperly, we use it to thump our numbers, which is not good. I also have a couple of other things I've got my eye on in our time. I also have a couple of other things that I need for you to look at. And this one will make zero. Again, look at this handbook. It's got everything in it. This is, cyberbullying. It's got, if you got 2 hours when it snows this weekend, if you'll spend with this, that would be the best 2 hours you've ever spent in the school business, I can tell you, in terms of knowing about discipline. The other thing that I've got that makes no sense to you folks is this. And the reason I can show you this is it's out of date now. Just prior to becoming Power School was known as NCWISE. It's just the very same program. And every district, you can see my name's on here because I'm the one that had them do this. Every district has a training system for Power School. And here is the training manual that I had made that has all the screens. Now, these aren't for public consumption because people can get in this and could get to areas that they shouldn't be. But my point in showing this is when you interview for your job, as you will start to do here before long, one of the things that people are going to ask you is about your experience. And one of the things that I want you to be honest about is don't go in, I know everything. You need to be, you need to know what you don't know. You need to be able to say, I've only ever seen Power School from the teacher portal. And I know there are many more modules than that, but I know that I know that. And so I'm willing to learn that. I'll go get the training immediately so I can do my share on teacher on discipline incident referrals. Just like I know that there's more to in the portal teacher observations. And I know that I've got to be trained to be an official evaluator, but I won't leave everybody hanging. I'll go get trained to do observations so I can do my part. I will go get trained to process disciplinary incidents and learn how to enter them into Power School. I'll go learn that immediately so that I can hold up my end of the bargain. And so when you look at that big manual, so what the corollary to that big disciplinary data reporting manual is, and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to know how to do all this stuff? They have training for you, and they have a manual with screenshots that will walk you through every step of it. But you've got to be willing to go and get trained. That's the idea here. All right, so as I said before, I've been very, very, very pleased with your OMA work. It's been great. We've got some folks that are already into task 4, and so I want to cover task 1. of the skip, as I told you that I would do tonight before I left you. And so let me do that right quick. I'm not going to belabor the point. Now, do not be the person who sends me an email wanting to know where the template is for the skip. There is no such thing. Please remember, you need to make your own template for the skip. Don't send me an email. You forgot to put it in our shell. No, I didn't forget. I'm old and I forget all the time, but I didn't forget your template. There is not one. You've got to make your own. By now, you've seen the process works. You ought to be able to make your own template. Now, let's get to skip task 1. The biggest problem that I see is that folks don't read the prompt. You need to do a needs assessment to determine gaps in communication. Period. We're not doing a needs assessment to see what our academic needs are or what's wrong with the gaps in communication. There's a parent communication section in both Advanced Ed or Cognia and in Teacher Working Condition Survey. Because if you're not in school right now, that would be the perfect place to go and do that. You can also send out a survey, but there's also a parent survey. The larger districts do a separate parent survey for their district, but you've also got TWC that addresses communication between the external, which is parents, and the internal, which is teachers and staff. We're looking for gaps in that communication, period. We're not looking for other things. So look for your parent survey for your district or TWC or Advanced Ed, the state surveys. We're looking at that parent piece for communication. That's what, for gaps in communication. So between the internal and external and potential opportunities for involving those communities and decisions that have direct effect on community in the schools. Needs assessment should include a background description of the setting. You've already done that. You did that in OMA task 1. Clear statement of purposes needs assessment. It's to look for gaps in communication, period. A list of participants. That would be, parent survey. Where'd you get this? I'm not telling you you have to convene a focus group and do a needs assessment. Not in the era of COVID. Use parent survey, TWC, or Advanced Ed. TWC is North Carolina, Advanced Ed, South Carolina. Parent surveys for either, that's district. Use those. Don't try to pull people together. People are tired of Zooming as well. Just use that data that's there. All you got to do is tell us where you got it from. Don't make this harder than it is. So yes, your school profile that you did, remember your school profile that you did for the AppTel, and it was part of the task 1 of the OMA. It's to copy and paste. Clear statement of the purpose. This is to determine gaps in communication. Doesn't have to be much more in depth than that. List of participants. I use TWC and the parent survey from my district. I use Advanced Ed and the parent survey. This is what it said in the parent section on communication. And just list those items. And then analysis of defining this is what it said. And then a set of recommendations that identifies avenue of communication that will be established. So this is going to be short term is going to be things like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're going to try to use social media better to better communicate with our parents. We want this to be something that's digital. Not we're going to create a phone tree or we're going to put flyers in their mailbox. No, we want this short term to be something digital, something more modern, a more modern way to communicate with people than we've done in the past. So that's short term. And then long term is once we've got them hooked, once we're communicating, once we've got them on board, some of our long term things are going to be family math night, family reading night, college night, all those things where we get people in our building, if we ever get to do that again, where we say to them, let us help you help your child. Let me say that again. Let us help you help your child, where we work with parents. Now, again, it's not about getting people in to watch a dance recital, a hip hop show, or, a donkey basketball game or a womanless wedding or a barbecue or a ball game. This is, we get people in for academic purposes, but it doesn't do any good to put those events on, those long-term events on, if we don't have any communication. Parents don't know, aren't involved in the planning, or aren't communicated with about that. So it's a two-step process. Short term is to get them hooked. Long term is then to get them in the building and help them help their child. That's the part that you got to get your head around. About half the time, my response to students when they turn in prompt 1 is both of your goals are both short term. I want to see something like family math night, family reading night, family EOG night. I want to see something where we have an event where parents come in our building. Once we have established short term, we've established communication. Long term, we want to try to get them in the building and get them involved in their child's education. And then you're going to look at the TWC, Advanced Ed, and Prompt 2. You're going to look at your leadership. All right, so we're going to look at, so there's 12 sections in TWC, and one of them is school leadership. It says it right here in the title. Don't look at teacher leadership, which is empowerment. And looking at those scores, identify the areas that you could suggest to the school improvement team that we improve in those areas. Now you're going to say, uh-oh, that's calling the principals out. Question is, can we use our Title I plan for next year's our parent engagement night? Yeah, that's fine. And so, but one of the things is the TWC data and Advanced Ed data is public information. You know, I mean, you know, if the shoe fits, you have to wear it sometime. You say, well, you know, I don't want to point this out. Well, it's already been pointed out. It's out there. It's public knowledge, folks. And so what you're going to do is come up with recommendations for the school improvement plan to improve school leadership. So in the end, we're going to have 3 things that we come out of task 1. We're going to have short-term communication goals to try to better connect with parents. We're going to have long-term goals, which are events to bring parents in to get them helping their child with academics. And the third is for our school improvement plan, we're going to have recommendations for improvement of the school leadership. That's it. It's not any more complicated than that. It's just not. And then all we're going to do when we get to task 2, we're going to identify the people and the money it's going to take to put those 2 goals and those 3 goals in place: short-term, long-term, and improve school leadership. What's it going to take to, you know, in terms of people and money? That's fiscal and human resources necessary to do that. And then we're going to put an action plan together, just like we've been. It's called a marketing plan. We use that same basic format that we used in the AppSell and AppTel, that same graphic organizer, the very same one. Again, don't reinvent the wheel. You're gonna thank me when we get to the AppTel. To the SIOP. When you get to the 6th one in the 5th task, you have to put all these graphic organizers together and come up with a working document of your school improvement plan. Who's going to do where, what, when, and why? And so if I go here, and so this is what I'm talking about. You should have this. I think I have it under these. I may have it under the skip materials under task and prompt. If not, I'll put it there in just a minute. I've gone too far. Imagine that. Come on back. Gee. This is what I'm talking about. That same graphic organizer that we use for every action plan, professional growth plan, marketing plan. It's the who, what, where, why. What specific activity? I should see 3 on this. I should see 1 that speaks, a minimum of 3. I should see 1 that addresses short-term communication goals. We're going to start a Facebook page. Okay. I should see 1 that addresses long-term. We're going to have family reading night. And I should see 1 that addresses, you know, improvement in school leadership. You know, a principal's advisory council. We're going to form something like that because teachers don't think they're being heard or their opinion matters. That's what we're talking about. That should be a minimum of 3. Timeline when we're going to do it, person who's going to do it. Do not put staff or teachers or, put somebody's name or position there. Staff never did anything. If you don't put somebody's name down, it won't happen. Resources needed, that's going to be money and people. You have to split those when you do task 2, but you can put them back together in task 3. This is how much money, this is the people who are going to do it. Formative assessment, remember formative assessment, that's not measuring halfway through. That's how we're going to make sure the adults are following through on this. Formative assessment is of the adults. That's a fidelity check. Are the people who are responsible to do this doing these things? Are we going to come up in March and nobody's planned the family math night? It's kind of late after that. If we have it later than March, how are we going to help kids get ready for the end of grade test? What system of checks and balances we're going to put in on these adults that we listed over here as the person's responsible. Over here, we need to know how we're going to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to. Formative assessment is always a fidelity check. Summative is did it work? What our goal was and our indicator of success. And I always have people say, well, what's the difference there? Well, our goal is across the board is to have 85% of our parents participating. But if only 40% have been participating traditionally, it's not reasonable to say we want to go from 40 to 85. An indicator of success would be if we went from 40 to 50% participating this year. That would be an indicator of success. Our goal is still 85. That doesn't change, but we have to be reasonable and responsible, and we have to be realistic about our goal. If we're at 80 and our goal is 85, then the indicator of success is 85. But if our goal overall is to get 85% parent participation and we're only averaging the 40s, it's unrealistic to say that our goal, that our indicator is 85. No, it's probably 50. And that's how we use that graphic organizer. And then we're going to put all those together from each of these evidences that we've done. And that becomes, guess what, your school improvement plan. So what we're teaching you through the evidence process is how to build a school improvement plan with a budget and a master schedule that supports it. It's almost like I do this for a living. It's amazing how a plan comes together. So this is how real school is supposed to work. You're supposed to know the difference between the real and the ideal. And that what we're trying to teach you is your situation. Yes, it's important to you. And yes, we like to hear about it in your discussion board post, but I'm also interested that you know how you're supposed to do it, the right way to do things. What we're teaching you in the Mels program is the right way to build a school improvement plan. It's the right way to build a master schedule and a budget that supports that, so that in the end we come back to that magic place that's about teaching and learning. In the end, our goal is to create schools with a culture of teaching and learning, because that's what we do. Questions you have for me about the skip? It's just as simple as I made it sound tonight. And no, there's not a template. I did put 2 examples for you in there, and I will make sure that the graphic organizer example, if you've lost yours, you were supposed to keep it, but if you've lost it, I will put a copy of it in there for you. All right, what have I missed tonight? Look at those materials. As always, I don't put those materials under the week for us to be to sit and go through the PowerPoints each time. That's for your reference. And so the question is will I be presenting next week? Me? No. I'll be wearing you out after you present. That's my job. I'll tell you how excited I am. The day of, it's kind of like when I used to coach 40 years ago. I'll be so excited that day I won't be able to eat. Look at me. how excited will that be? I'll be so excited for a case study day that I won't even be able to eat. You know, all I used to do on game day was eat a roll of Tums. That's how excited I'll be for next Wednesday. I'm sitting here right now. I just can't hardly wait. So no, I won't present, but boy, will I get my turn. You can believe that. So you better be good. You know, the way you avoid the way you avoid a whipping is come prepared. Be good. Otherwise, it might not be as much fun for you as it is for me. No, but I know that you will do. You folks, you far exceeded my expectation. I know that you'll be great. But we'll have a good time. But no, I will not present. When I open that next week, I'll turn it over. I will turn it over. I'll turn it over to you. So the question came in the discussion post, what am I looking for from the AP interview? Well, I'm looking for you to talk to them about due process and ask them many of the questions that I talked to you. Take the main points from tonight's presentation. What system do we use? You know, talk to them. You should be able to form 3 or 4 really good questions from tonight's class about talking to them. You're interviewing your AP about due process and processing discipline. That's it. You should have some takeaways from tonight, from this week's lesson. You should have, from your reading and from tonight's class, you should have some things that you just have a burning desire to ask your AP. That's what I'm interested in, is that you're excited or have questions or want to know things. I want you to be inquisitive. I used to put out a list of interview questions for the AP, and I stopped doing that because a lot of people didn't want to know. They didn't have any ownership in it. They didn't care about the things that I felt like they ought to know. And what I found is they got a whole lot more out of it when they had their own questions. So this is what's important to me. This is what I want to know. You tend to get, and you don't get the same responses from everybody that way as well. That adds a little value.
So Dr. Lim, so we don't know who is presenting next week. We don't know which group is
Everybody
going
is. Everybody
okay.
will be presenting next week. Every group will present.
Okay, next week. So everybody's
going to present next week the exact same case.
Okay, thank you.
And whoever goes first, whoever pulls the short straw and I call on first, they'll be the one that'll take the brunt of my wrath.
Oh no.
No, but I will ask questions as we go for each of the group. But it always, the group that goes first tends to get the questions the first time. The other groups after that, they get the same questions, but they've had a chance to come up with their alibi or by the time that I get to them or think about what their answer is. But everybody's going to go next week. It's not going to be, everybody's going to go. Be prepared. Everybody's going to go. And I will pick the group, based on some random criteria of who has to go first. Usually if somebody emails me and says, I've got something big coming up, can my group go first? Then I'll usually pick them. Now, usually they won't do that. They'll know not to ever do that again, to volunteer to go first. But somebody will always volunteer to go first. If not, I pick somebody at random to go first. We'll have a good time. Well, at least I will next week. I hope that you will. I know I will. And so I'm so excited waiting on this. It'll be sometimes, we get a lot of views on these on YouTube, just people watching these. They're so much fun. It's kind of like watching Benny Hill. It's like a comedy show. And so people watch these. So be prepared. It'll be good. All right, questions that you have. Well, as always, I've enjoyed it and thank both of our sitting principals for their time and attention tonight and bringing what they know about what they do to inform you, to help you with what you're going to do. I appreciate them every week. They kind of keep me focused on the real and not the ideal. And that's important. we have to operate in the real world. I'll see you next week. Everybody needs to be prepared. Have your PowerPoint. Be ready. Answer the questions. You know, do some digging. Don't just look at things on the surface. These are onions. There's many layers to these case studies. They're not as easy or as quick or as you think they are. You better dig a little bit. You better be paying attention to all that we've learned so far. And so I will see you next week at 7. Everybody have a good week and please be safe. Prayers for you and your family. I'll see you next week. Good night.